Welcome to our virtual Meet the Developers. I'm Suzette Mahoney, most recently a partner at R2L Restaurant and the president of CCPA. CCPA is an intimate and diverse group of business owners, executives, and managers looking to build relationships and offer each other meaningful resources. We take pride in bringing you unparalleled access to speakers, decision makers, and leaders who are shaping Center City. We keep our members and guests informed about business challenges and opportunities in Philadelphia and help them become Center City smart. As we figure out how to help Philadelphia's business community overcome the challenges that lie ahead, we will continue to shift our programming and networking offerings to best support our members and guests. We welcome all suggestions, so we encourage you today to put them in the chat feature throughout our program. To mention a few of our upcoming events, CCPA's annual membership meeting is November 18th. Paul Levy of the Center City District will speak about Center City's recovery, and we will introduce our new board members. Our next lunch with city leaders will kick off the new year, which is hard to believe that's coming up, with Roberto Perez, the CEO of Hilco Redevelopment Partners, the new owners of the oil refinery, and that's in January. You can find a full schedule of our events on centercityproprietors.org. So let's review a few details about today's event. We are recording this and we will share it afterwards. We will mute everyone to maintain audio and visual controls. Please use the chat to ask questions, comments, make suggestions, and connect with each other. And if you need to take care of business, feel free to turn off the video. There is a link to today's program in the chat. We are pleased to collaborate with and welcome members of Crew Philadelphia and BIA Philadelphia. Finally, I'd like to thank today's sponsors, without whom these events wouldn't be possible. CCPA's preferred benefits provider, Michael Craig of Penworth Financial Services, Domus Construction, Friedman LLP, Overmayer Redmond, Maxwell and Hipple, ServPro of Germantown, and TD Bank. And now I'd like to welcome Michael Trimble, Vice President and Senior Relationship Manager at TD Bank.
Thank you so much, Suzette. Good morning, everyone. On behalf of TD, thanks for joining. We've been a proud sponsor of CCPA in this event over the years, and especially at a time when it's more important than ever to bring forward-thinking minds together. TD is the top 10 bank in the US and has been tremendously active through this whole pandemic. We've done over 80,000 PPP loans for about $8.6 billion. We're currently working with our customers through the forgiveness process in that, through partnership with the SBA. And we continue to be a very active lender in the commercial real estate space. Our group focuses primarily on projects that are about $1 to $20 million, mostly stabilized income-producing assets. We also have a team that works with our small business community and real estate investors with lending needs less than $1 million. And in the PA and Southern New Jersey market, we manage a book of about $3.7 billion of funded commercial real estate loans. It's up about 7.5% year over year. So we're doing deals, and it's an important time to be doing so. Many of you we know, many of you we'd love to have conversations with and learn more about upcoming projects. It's still a very favorable time to take advantage of the low interest rate environment, and in terms of refinancing and recapitalizations, et cetera. And so we're certainly an active community member here, and will continue to be, as we get out of this pandemic. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Center City Proprietors Board Member and event sponsor, Suzanne Spinell-Schuster from Friedman LLP. Suzanne.
Well, thank you, Michael. And thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this morning. I am Suzanne Spinell-Schuster, Director in charge of Accounting Services at Friedman LLP. I am also a proud member of CCPA's Board of Directors. I am thrilled that Friedman is a sponsor of this event, and I look forward to hearing from our panel of experts. Friedman LLP has been serving the accounting, tax, and business consulting needs of public and private companies for nearly a century, with offices in Philadelphia, New Jersey, New York, California, and Beijing. The real estate industry's propensity for rapid growth and change generates new challenges and great rewards. Friedman's real estate practice provides a full scope of accounting, audit, tax, and consulting services to developers, contractors, real estate investors, institutional owners and lenders, property management companies, parking garages, and hotels. To address the complexities of this ever-changing industry and to capitalize on new opportunities. And now it is my pleasure to introduce today's moderator. Natalie Kostelni has researched and written about commercial and residential real estate and economic development for the Philadelphia Business Journal since 1999. She received her undergraduate degree at Villanova University and a master's degree in journalism from the University of Missouri, Columbia. She lives in the Valley Forge area with her husband and daughter. And just as an add-in, I saw Natalie this weekend on one of the news shows. Natalie's biography and those of our panelists are in the program we emailed to you earlier, and the link is posted in the chat. So please join me in waving a warm virtual welcome to Natalie Kostelni.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I really appreciate that. Welcome everyone to the Center City Proprietors Association, Meet the Developers. We have a really good panel before us today, and they represent different but equally important aspects of Philadelphia's real estate community. Let me spend a few minutes talking about where Philadelphia is these days before we get into the panel discussion. The pandemic has created a stark representation of Philadelphia in just about every urban environment, whether that's a large city like Philadelphia or a smaller city in the suburbs, such as Wayne, Malvern, or Haddonfield. In spite of that, investment in real estate and development is going on, though it's not as visible or on the scale that we saw before the coronavirus. Development is underway at the Navy Yard and University City with CHOP, Penn, Drexel, and the Science Center undertaking projects that continue to solidify Philadelphia's strength in eds and meds and building upon its growing life science sector. A new office building is being constructed on the western fringes of the Central Business District, and apartment buildings continue to rise. Work is being done in Philadelphia's neighborhoods and its suburbs. So here we are in the middle of a pandemic. Social injustice is top of mind, and we're in a recession. Construction is still going on. The 10-year tax abatement is still up for debate, and jobs and investment are under threat as we do enter this economic downturn. Under that backdrop, let's get into our panel conversation. At this time, I'm going to ask each panelist, I'm going to introduce them, and I'm going to ask them to take a minute or two to tell us about their company or organization and a couple of current projects they are working on. As moderator, please know that my role is to keep us on time and to give everyone a chance to talk. I may cut you off if I feel we need to move on. To the audience, please feel free to send questions in. Let me introduce our panel. We have Casandra Domínguez, Director of Research at Cushman and Wakefield, Anthony Miles, Founder, Fund Manager at TPP Capital Management Group, Harris Steinberg, Founding Executive Director of the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation at Drexel University, and Ken Weinstein, President of Philly Office Retail. Casandra, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your work at Cushman and Wakefield.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you, CCPA, for having me. As Natalie said, I'm Director of Research at Cushman and Wakefield, which is a full services commercial real estate firm, and I'm the Director of Research for the Philadelphia and Baltimore regions, although I sit in Philadelphia, and I've been there for 2 years, and what I really do there is partner with our different service lines and brokerage in particular in using data to strategically position our clients in the marketplace. And prior to my tenure at Cushman and Wakefield, I worked for 5 years at the Center City District with Paul Levy doing business attraction for the downtown. So I'm very familiar with the organization, and obviously Center City, well, I now cover the entire region. Center City has always been near and dear to my heart, and will continue to be.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Cassandra. Anthony, Miles, tell us a little bit about TPP and some of the projects you're undertaking these days.
Thank you. TPP, I'm the fund manager and also the lead developer on a minority-led firm, TPP Capital Management Group. Our group is developing a 5-city square block master whole neighborhood development and adjacent to Temple University Health Science Campus. That neighborhood is the worst neighborhood in the city of Philadelphia for health disparities, high level of diabetes, obesity. There's 500 vacant lots in that neighborhood. It's the worst neighborhood, but the best opportunity for a new neighborhood. So we're excited. We've been working on that project for 5 years. And early next year, we'll start breaking ground on multiple housing, commercial, retail, infrastructure works. So we're pretty excited about the project.
Yeah, it's a really big undertaking. Good luck with.
Thank you.
Yeah, Harris, tell us a little bit of about what you're working on at Lindy these days.
Great. Good morning, Natalie, and great to see everybody virtually. So Harris Steinberg, Executive Director, Lindy Institute, Urban Innovation, Drexel University. I have the pleasure of kind of getting to work with John Fry, the president of the university, and his senior development team. This is campus and off-campus development, kind of managing kind of a monthly conversation about kind of the overall urbanism strategy for the university. And that includes not only campus-wide development, but 2 innovation districts that we are partnering on both the west and the east side of the campus, one with Wexford Science and Technology on the old University City High School site to the west of the campus. That's part of the Science Center. And then to the east, there's 14 acres that we own that Brandywine Real Estate Trust is developing as an innovation district. So there's lots of interesting kind of issues associated with that, equity being one of them, inclusive growth, how we manage kind of relationships with the neighbors, as well as stimulate kind of the burgeoning life sciences sector as you're talking about. I also, through the Institute, work on projects like a vision for the 1,400-acre former PES refinery site, which I know Roberto Perez is coming in to speak to the group later on. So I have a number of different kind of lenses through which I'm able to kind of participate, and I'll kind of stop at that before I go on too long.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Harris. And Ken, tell us a little bit about your work and the neighborhoods you're in.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. I welcome the chance to wear a button-down shirt for the first time in 5 months. So I appreciate the invitation this morning. As Natalie said, I'm the president of Philly Office Retail. We are a mission-driven real estate developer that focuses on what we call middle neighborhoods. And more specifically, what we do is we buy and renovate vacant commercial properties. So we're trying to remove blight in middle neighborhoods and improve the quality of life. We have a little over 800,000 square feet that we currently own and manage. And most of those holdings are in Germantown, Mount Airy, West Philly, Upper Darby, and Norristown. And some of our most recent projects, as Natalie knows, are in the Wayne Junction area, which is the bordering community between Nicetown and Germantown. And we are in the process of spending $34 million renovating mostly previously used factory buildings into adaptive reuse, other uses, including apartments, offices, restaurants, retail, and some light industrial. So we're very excited to be in the middle of that project.
Ken, we'll start with you. How has the coronavirus affected your business and your projects, whether That's occupancy, rent collections, financing. Or
Yeah, well, initially, we had to stop construction, right, in April going into May. We were very fortunate at the time to be working on a medical facility, Mannery Pediatrics, which allowed us to continue at least on that one project while everything else got shut down. But we were anticipating the worst. I thought that rent collections, particularly for commercial properties, would be around 50%. We hit 94% last month. So we have been, it's been a nice surprise for us that it's actually done well. And in terms of leasing commercial space, it's also just much better than we expected. We have less inventory than ever right now. Amazingly, people are opening up restaurants and education hubs and garden centers and a variety of different uses in the middle of the pandemic. I thought all that would have come to an end, but it hasn't.
Oh, interesting. Anthony, how about with your projects and what you're working on? How's financing? Have you had to change anything that you're doing?
No, actually, it's interesting. For us, where we were blessed in that we got a lot of our approvals through zoning before the pandemic. So once we got through zoning and, with the slowdown, our architect is less busy. So now he could focus on our project. So that was a benefit. Also, the city's a little slow. They had a system to reboot. So that's a process. But in terms of financing and capital, different various of capital stacks, we're able to talk to people that otherwise, if it wasn't the pandemic, we wouldn't be talking to. So we have a lot of different stakeholders from, institutional investors to foundations now that we have their attention because the area is has the worst health disparities in the city. It actually accelerating our project because one of the aspects of our project, we're doing a primary care and specialty clinic for the area. So now we got a lot of people interested in that even gave us some seed money to plan it out. So I don't think that probably would have happened if it was if the pandemic didn't happen. So I would say our project has been accelerated because of the pandemic.
That's amazing. It's interesting how much in real estate timing has to do with success and progress. That's great. Harris, how about at Drexel? Has anything with all the projects that Drexel is involved in, have they been affected by the coronavirus or even some of the planning that you guys are doing?
Great question, because a lot of this is so long-term. The projects themselves, particularly with our development partners, continue apace. Wexford Science and Technology is building a new K-8 science, STEM school for us on the old University City High School site. That's due to be completed by the end of this year. We have a new academic tower for nursing and College of Medicine also going up on that site. So those projects are moving forward. In Schuylkill Yards, which is to the east, the Bulletin building has been repurposed. Spark Therapeutics is in there. If anyone's gone by that site recently, Drexel Square has opened. It's a beautiful new square at the parking lot in front of the Bulletin between 30th Street Station and the Bulletin. There's a new kind of lab building going up. There's a new life science project being planned. So there's lots of optimism. The market seems to be strong, particularly in the life sciences, and those projects have not significantly halted. The university as a whole has taken a big hit. I mean, as a business, we're going to have to kind of come out of that hole in the next couple of years and then face a trough in student enrollment in 2026. So there's a lot of recalibrating the kind of economics of higher ed, particularly at Drexel. And if you saw the Times yesterday, there are universities across the country that are decimating programs, laying off faculty, and not admitting students. So the industry as a whole clearly is suffering. But from a construction point of view, from a development point of view, it remains strong in University City.
That's good. That's encouraging. Cassandra, let's get into some of the data that you're seeing as a result of the pandemic. And let's look at Center City, let's look at the region, and all the food groups that you want to touch on.
Sure. So I'll try not to ramble and throw too many numbers at the panel, but I think that the way that I thought I'd kind of tackle this in a digestible form is to kind of cover 3 sectors, starting with office, then talking about industrial, and then retail. I'll talk about a little bit regionally, but focus mostly on Center City, given that this is a CCPA. And obviously downtown is really, the motor of the region. Obviously University City kind of part of that as well. So with office leasing, what we've been seeing is just generally throughout the region is that it has very much slowed leasing activity, as most tenants are unwilling to make any long-term real estate decisions, given the uncertainty that's surrounded with COVID-19, work from home, what does the new normal, what is that going to look like coming out of here? And I just think it's too soon to tell for a lot of companies what the impact is going to be and what their space requirements are going to look like, 3 to 5 years down the line. So what we're seeing is that most tenants that are facing an expiration are negotiating short-term renewals to weather the storm in place. But yeah, there's been a big hit to leasing activity. So looking at downtown in particular, year-to-date leasing activity is down 42% compared to average leasing volumes that we had experienced during comparable periods in 2018 and 2019. While there has not been a big uptick in vacancy yet, and we only saw about 100,000 square feet of additional vacant sublease space hit the market in Q3, vacancy is expected to go up in the next few quarters because we have several large blocks of vacant space, as well as sublease space that's expected to hit the market over the next few quarters. And because we have limited leasing activity right now, given the current environment, it is unlikely that that space is going to be quickly backfilled. There are some bright spots, which I think I can touch on as well a little bit further during the panel discussion. Obviously, life sciences is continuing to move forward. It's hard to work from home if you're in a lab, as well as that industry just generally doing well in this environment. So given the strength of our region in life sciences and eds and meds, we are seeing that if there is leasing transactions, that life sciences is a big driver of that. Sorry about that. It seems like there's a little bit of backfeed. And then kind of looking at industrial, on the other hand, has very much been a bright spot in commercial real estate. And for Philadelphia, it's no different. Pre-pandemic, industrial demand drivers were really accelerated by COVID-19, which is why year-to-date leasing activity in that sector is up 117% over the same period a year ago. And vacancy is very tight in the Philadelphia MSA and industrial space at under 3%. What we're seeing is that e-commerce tenants are aggressively expanding their last mile distribution network throughout the region because they're really eager to penetrate the MSA's dense customer and population base. And this very much includes Amazon. I mean, they are on a leasing spree. They signed 4 leases in the third quarter. And over the past 5 quarters, the e-commerce giant signed about 3.5 million square feet of leasing, which is almost a third of all leasing activity for the entire region. And it doesn't seem that they're slowing down anytime soon. So this strong demand that we're seeing in the industrial space pre-pandemic, and I think going into the pandemic, is really driving spec development in Philadelphia because there's such strong demand. However, I do want to caution that more than 3/4 of the space, industrial space that's currently under construction, is already pre-leased, which is going to keep vacancy tight and also put upward pressure on rents as demand seems to be outpacing supply given constraints with land and construction for industrial. And then lastly, just looking at retail, like the rest of the global retail sector, downtown stores and restaurants were really badly affected by the pandemic and the government mandated shutdown in the spring. However, we're starting to see some signs of recovery in downtown retail, starting to rebound. My former employer, the Center City District, recently published a report where they tracked every single storefront downtown. And what you can see there is that by late September, about 80% of storefronts were open compared to a little over half in June. And you're also starting to see that there are less boarded up premises, just 56 out of 1,800 storefronts. And the other, I think, really key here is pedestrian volumes, which have also started to rebound, steadily rising from, 33% of previous year volume to just under 50% by the end of September. So the only thing I do want to this is where I'm going to make a plea to, everyone who's listening. Despite the signs of recovery, it's fragile, and retailers and restaurants can only operate at a fraction of their usual revenue for so long. So, 75% of downtown storefronts are local retailers, and they're particularly vulnerable to weather the storm. So as much as you can, whether it's online, pickup, delivery, try and patronize local retail, because they are really what have made Center City so vibrant. We get so many headlines and accolades about our restaurant and retail scene. And so my plea to the audience is just to continue to support and patronize local retail. So I'll pause there because I know that was a lot of information, and give it back to Natalie.
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful overview of the three areas. And I do want to kind of piggyback on what you're saying. If you've noticed, Philadelphia, and because you have to increase outdoor dining, and you have exercise classes outdoors now, it seems like Philadelphia is really learning how to use its open spaces better. And in some respects, it looks a little more like Europe than it ever has. And I just hope that it continues, that this is something that we adopt on a long-term basis, because I think it really helps the vibrancy of Philadelphia. So let's jump to looking at the future a little bit. Harris, let's start with you. How do you think Philadelphia will emerge from the pandemic and economic slump? One of the areas you have studied is the refinery. You've looked at the waterfront. All of these are still in progress, which is nice, right? Even though we're in the middle of this pandemic, people are thinking forward and about the future. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Not having a crystal ball or being a prognosticator professionally, I can say that looking historically, cities rebound from these kind of traumas. Philadelphia itself, the planning of Philadelphia was based on post-Great Fire London. So the 1666 fire in London, the plague, all of that informed actually the planning of Philadelphia, the wide open streets, the green country town, fresh air. We have a city that actually has done this before. We've rebounded from previous epidemics. The waterworks was created to protect the water supply. Fairmount Park went further to create a 4,000 acre working landscape that still provides water to 1 million people a day. So we will get through this. We definitely see the green shoots and the signs of life. On the refinery, I did a presentation yesterday for John Fry's Real Estate Council. I reminded them that oil refining or storage took place on that site for 150 years, right? We have to think 150 years into the future of how we want to imagine that site being reclaimed and reknitted back into the fabric of Philadelphia. So all of these trends, I think, are long-term. In the short term, again, I think from what we've heard, there are signs of life on campus. Shake Shack had its best month this summer. Retail is strong still on campus. So again, cities are going to rebound, but there are lessons that we've learned. We're helping Philadelphia Parks and Rec and the Office of Transportation Infrastructure and Sustainability on permanent improvements to the Ben Franklin Parkway. In 2026, I led a planning process called More Park, Less Way, which looked on how you might create more urban vibrancy on the parkway. A beautiful, iconic street, but for the most part, a traffic corridor from the northwest into Center City. The Parks and Rec and the Conservancy have done proof of concept over the last few years in terms of programming the Oval, Aikens Oval, the 8-acre traffic circle and parking lot in front of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And it's proved to be a very successful kind of pop-up space. So now what are the permanent improvements we can make there? And the pandemic is influencing our thinking. The social unrest following the murder of George Floyd is influencing our thinking. The homeless encampment that is just coming down on the Parkway is influencing our thinking. It's not just, again, a big ceremonial space. The city has an opportunity to have a conversation about the future in a way that I think could be very successful and healing if we use the Parkway sort of as a metaphor for kind of that kind of conversation. So again, I feel very hopeful. If there's short-term pain, no question. There's a lot of sectors that are hurting. There are people that are hurting. But Philadelphia has shown remarkable resiliency in the last 2 decades. If you go back to 2000 or even early 1990s, Philadelphia was on the brink of bankruptcy. Ed Rendell on his knees, cleaning toilets in City Hall. We've come a long way. We have a long way to go, but the housing market is strong. Kevin Gillen's numbers this past week are showing that. And I think those are all signs of life and health for Philadelphia to come.
That's true. Thank you. Anthony, I'd like to get your thoughts on how you think Philadelphia will emerge from the pandemic.
I think that, like Harris said, Philadelphia I would always say Philadelphia has been a safe city in the sense that Philadelphia has never really overbuilt, underbuilt. We've always kind of been in the middle, where when other markets have issues, Philadelphia kind of is the city that's stable. I want to use the word stable. But what I do see is an opportunity with COVID and also with the racial inequities for Center City to finally connect with the urban neighborhoods. I think there's always been a disconnect. And I think for Philadelphia to move forward into the next chapter, until those neighborhoods are healthy, Center City is never going to be healthy. So I think that, I know that there's a huge opportunity for the city to step up and be a national leader and create a unified model. People always complain about money. There's not a shortage of money. What there is a shortage of is creative thinkers. There's money. There's been money being poured into Detroit, Erie, and other cities around the country. And the reason why they're getting the money is because they're screaming the loudest. Or they're packaging up the city and their cities in such a way that these big name philanthropists are pouring tens of millions of dollars. Why can't Philadelphia get that kind of money? So I think that that's a leadership issue because in order to get that kind of money, those institutions want to see the city of Philadelphia on the city itself to be on board. And just recently, I'll give you an example. There was a proposal that was put out by the Arteris in combination with, I want to believe, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And they were given $10 million to 5 cities. Well, Philadelphia wasn't even going to put in for it. They didn't even know about it. Michael Nutter is on one of the board of this committee. So I had to convince the city to put in for $10 million to support these Black neighborhoods. It would have went to Baltimore or some of these other cities. That's a prime example of my frustration with the city. I don't think they're proactive enough, even for Center City. So that's what I see in the future is we need creative leadership. We need a city government that I don't expect them to solve all of our problems, but what I do expect that there's some money coming down the pike, at least fight for the money. So that's what I see in the future of Philadelphia.
Yeah. Ken, you're a neighborhood guy, so Anthony's preaching to the choir, so to speak, when he's talking about it. So let me hear what your thoughts are on where Philadelphia is headed post-pandemic and your neighborhoods that you're in and maybe ones that you're looking to go into.
Yeah, needless to say, I agree with a lot of what Anthony just said. But I'm an optimist. It's the best and worst thing about me. I think we're going to come out of the pandemic stronger than ever. And the reason for that is a lot of my mentees in my Jumpstart Germantown program keep asking, because they're new to real estate development, how is this recession different than '08 and previous economic downturns? So I've thought a lot about that. And the biggest difference is that this recession is not caused by a structural deficiency in the economy. '08 clearly was, there was a massive bubble, you know, and the two previous economic downturns that I've done business in, late '80s and then into the tech bubble, have also been deficiencies. So it feels like in some ways this is artificially brought upon us, and I know it's real, I get it. I think a couple caveats to my optimism. If we don't get another PPP or something like that, I think Cassandra's warning is very well taken. There will be a lot of retail and restaurants and so on that are going to go out if we don't get another PPP. The other caveat is we still don't know how long this is going to last for. And if it really does go to the end of 2021, my optimism is going to be pulled back some. So I'm making the assumption that this ends sooner rather than later. But you know as well as I know. But I think there is a lot of, as Harris was alluding to, there's a lot of learning that we have done already and will continue to do, and it's actually been very healthy. Just as an example, I chair the Mount Airy Business Improvement District, and we built 6 pocket parks along Germantown Avenue. And a lot of people considered it frivolous, you know, oh, that's how nice, you're building a little park. And they are so well used right now because people are looking to build community, to find a place to sit outside. And of course, we're seeing that in Center City and elsewhere also. So I'm hoping that that continues, that grows, that makes us stronger moving ahead. So, you know, it's you know, in every economic downfall like this, there are some positives that if we learn from, we will be stronger. So we'll see where we end up.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Cassandra, I want to go back to the office market for a moment, if you don't mind. You mentioned how leasing activity was down and more sublease spaces coming on the market. And I know we've all kind of read articles or heard the office is dead. People won't want to go back to their offices, but I would argue that the reason why we were able to pivot at working from home to begin with is because we built relationships and culture and the office environment. So Cassandra, tell us what you're hearing from your brokers on how they feel about the office of the future.
Yeah, so I mean, just to quickly echo on some of the comments that some of the other panelists made, especially Anthony, the good thing about Philadelphia, particularly in downturns, is that we're, in the office market especially, is that we're kind of a slow and steady market. And what that means is that we don't have the high highs or the low lows of other markets, like say, for example, New York and San Francisco. So there are definitely clouds on the horizon in the office market, as I talked about in my previous comments. But at the same time, so far, we've weathered the pandemic much better than some of these other markets that have seen a huge uptick in vacancy, sublease space, and a hit to rent. And we haven't seen that yet in our market. Obviously, as I mentioned before, vacancy is going to go up. And I think in the short term, as we weather this storm, the indicators are going to show that there's going to be a hit, particularly because leasing activity has slowed. You tend to see that impact lag in subsequent quarters when those move-ins might have taken place. That being said, what we're hearing from a lot of tenants is that they're not ready to make decisions because they're still trying to figure out what the new normal looks like. But by no means have we heard a wholesale office is dead, we're not coming back. So, I mean, it obviously runs the gamut. I think some tenants are being opportunistic with, well, if people are working from home at this time, maybe we're going to put, you know, space on the sublease market to see if we get our price, but that it's not necessarily fully just from a distress perspective. And I think that tenants are also being forward-looking in looking at what the office of the future is. And what we're hearing from a lot of tenants is that a lot of people can't wait to get back into the office, that working from home is hard. Cushman and Wakefield did a global survey. We do all kinds of surveys with global occupiers and our strategic consulting group. And I love reading all of the numbers and data coming through, and they actually had some surprising tidbits. So one of the things that came out of that was that actually the baby boomer generation, while they didn't like working from home, was actually the generation that adapted best to it, which might seem surprising because of the technology. But it's actually the millennials and Gen Xers that were having a lot of issues with adapting, particularly because they tend to be two working households. So me, for example, me and my husband share an office and I'm on the phone all day, and he hates it. So he had to buy noise canceling headphones, but it's hard to share space. And we're lucky we have an office at home and I have a second screen. Most people might be working from their kitchen, tables. And then also you have children at home, which makes it, with them having to be homeschooled, virtually, is hard. And then you also have issues with technology. So what we're hearing is that actually working from home, I think, is going to be in our future because it's been proven that it can work. But I think that it's going to be a balance where you're going to see a percentage of work from home, but that you're still going to the office, say 3 days a week. And that the office is a place for collaboration and for building culture. And also for those younger employees, for me, and when I was young in my career, it was invaluable to be in the office to get mentored. And so what a lot of companies are worried about is culture, and they see that as having to happen in a physical place. So what the new office looks like, I think, is still to be determined, but there's still a need and reason for office space. And I think when you heard, Morgan Lewis with their new tower talk about how they decided not to shrink their footprint, they're also obviously changing the layout and what that space looks like, but that they still feel they're going to need the same amount of space. It's just going to look different than maybe it would have pre-pandemic.
Sure. And maybe that pendulum of smaller office space and benching, you need more space now.
Yes.
For desks and
yes, and then that's something that's for sure that you're going to see, is that there was such a huge pre-pandemic, the word was densification. That was like the big trend in office, was densify, densify, densify. And I think post-pandemic, what you're going to see is de-densification, and you're going to see maybe less of that type of benching. And if you do have that benching, the way that it's going to be laid out, I think, is going to be flexible, where you can really change the space in case another pandemic comes along. So I think companies don't want to be caught off guard for something like this happens similar in the future. And so I think what you're going to see is that there's obviously going to be an impact to space and how we're using it, but it's still to be determined what that means in terms of actual footprint.
Yeah. Okay. Harris, one of the topics you and I've talked about over the years are the riverfront, the Delaware River, and now we've got the Lower Schuylkill being a focus, and that's developing, Grace Ferry. So if you don't mind, let's get into a little bit of the relationship, Philadelphia and the rivers, and some of the development activity that is happening and expected to happen.
Sure. So Philadelphia has a long and, I think, kind of troubled / ambivalent relationship with its rivers. Clearly, it's a city founded on river transportation. In the 1600s, that's how you got places. It was the airport of its day. The Delaware emerged as really the workforce industrial engine of not only Philadelphia and Pennsylvania, but the country, as we kind of grew into an industrial power post-centennial, just before World War II. So the rivers are extremely important to Philadelphia. As I mentioned before, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, we, because of a yellow fever epidemic, we created the Fairmount Waterworks. We pumped water up from the Schuylkill to where the Art Museum is now, and then gravity fed it to the city below, and that was the first municipal water system in the country. We then furthered that after consolidation in the 1850s to create Fairmount Park, all of which, again, kind of is part of water being the kind of underlying narrative of Philadelphia. After World War II, as Ed Bacon and other planners began to kind of think about the future of the city and making moves to create Society Hill, Independence Mall, the gallery. There were some big moves. The waterfront also came into view, and Bacon's vision for Penn's Landing kind of was one of those. Unfortunately, he also was infatuated with highways and put I-95 right in front of Penn's Landing. So we have, again, this ambivalent kind of relationship with the river. As many of you know, and certainly you, Natalie, know, in 06 and 07, I was fortunate enough to lead a planning effort for the future of the Central Delaware. 1,100 acres. Remember, Center City is 1,200 acres. So we're dealing in very big kind of geographic area, from Oregon at the south to Allegheny at the north, the river to I-95. A raucous public conversation against a backdrop of a reform election. Nutter was eventually elected. Casino gambling had sort of accelerated the public angst about the future of the waterfront. Previous decisions had been made about planning on the waterfront, like putting Walmarts and gated communities, just further exacerbated the problem. In the end, this process prevailed. We created a vision that was based on civic values and principles that is now being implemented by the Delaware River Waterfront Corporation. And I think the proof of that test is that the Durst organization was selected a month ago by the Waterfront Corporation to finally develop Penn's Landing. This is the holy grail we've been chasing my whole lifetime. I think what's important about Durst in relation to this conversation is that that's a New York company that's coming into Philly. They first got their taste of Philly when they were bidding on the Schuylkill Yards project with Jerry Sweeney and Brandywine that Drexel had put the RFP out on. And they recognized that lots of New Yorkers are moving to Philadelphia, that as a company, they stay in it for the long run. They don't sell their properties. This is probably a 100-year play for them. So that's a major kind of, I think, affirmation of kind of Philadelphia's waterfront coming of age, if you will. On the Schuylkill, we have tremendous growth on the northern part of the lower Schuylkill. So you've got Aramark moving into the old design center. You have all of CHOP, Penn, Science Center, Drexel. I mean, it's an enormous explosion. It really, in many ways, has become the epicenter of what we now call Center City. The river to 40th Street, Girard Avenue to Washington is looked really as the regional center of greater Philadelphia. And then on the lower Schuylkill, of course, you've got this 1,400 acres that Hillco has picked up. That's an immense amount of real estate with tremendous kind of toxic remediation that's required. But the opportunities for development there in the next, like I said, 50, 100, 150 years are extraordinary. So I think, and let's not forget the Schuylkill Trail. That kind of has become, in many ways, the poster child for urban revitalization. It's crowded as can be, but the valiant efforts to kind of snake that trail either on land, on water, down to Bartram's Garden. It's not like Emerald City is in sight. We can get to the mouth at Girard Point. So I think Philly has finally taken advantage of the waterfronts. We were early to the game in Bacon's era before any of the other cities were now kind of getting to it late. But as with our sports stadium, sometimes we learn from kind of case studies before us. And I think the riverfronts are really our prime real estate of the day.
I agree. We have a question from our friend Marty Tuzman. In light of our legacy of racial and economic and neighborhood disparity, how can our real estate development accelerate change in creating equity and equality? I'd like to hear some of these initiatives from Ken, Anthony, and Harris's work. So Ken, why don't you take that? Then we'll go to Anthony and then the Harris. And I do want to say we only have about 8 minutes left. This has gone by way too fast. So let's just be mindful of that as you answer. So Ken.
Yeah, Marty, thanks for your question. There's obviously a lot of ways of doing this, but as you know, we 5 years ago started a Jumpstart Germantown program that's now in 7 other neighborhoods. And I think it's an ideal way to help with this issue. I mean, what we need to be doing is bringing opportunity to people who want to get involved in real estate development, who can develop and improve their own neighborhoods, who can help to build wealth locally. And for those of you who don't know, the Jumpstart Germantown program, we train, network, mentor, and loan money to aspiring real estate developers to help everybody get involved. And more than 85% of our graduates have been women or people of color who historically have not been able to break into real estate development. The other way I think we can do this as developers and property owners is by, to be honest, giving some preference to Black-owned businesses, which is what we've been trying to do the last few years by offering 100% fit out to to tenants so that they can get into properties, and taking more risk, helping Black-owned businesses that are startups to get into properties to succeed. So I think we need to be doing that as a real estate community.
Right, thank you. Anthony.
Thank you. We have many, so I'm just going to focus on a couple of interventions or strategies. The first one is we believe that the future is smart neighborhood technology. So we have designed a smart neighborhood technology center in the Tioga neighborhood. And that smart neighborhood technology center will train up area residents and residents of North Philly on all aspects of the smart neighborhood technology industry. They could either, to create jobs and also for entrepreneurship, where they can start their own business in the smart neighborhood technology, and not only service our properties that we're building, they'll be able to service other new construction projects that need smart neighborhood technology and interventions. The second one is what Ken talked about. We plan on being creative and getting subsidies for Black and Brown-owned businesses to set up retail on a commercial corridor in two forms. One, rental subsidies. We need to subsidize their rents. I understand when they're getting started with startups, they need some help. And the second is what Ken talked about, which is subsidies for their fit out. And that way you give them a chance to succeed. I think the rental subsidies, we're trying to subsidize a portion of their rent for the first 5 years of their lease to make sure that they're able to, and another way is we're helping them through an attorney we're working with in Center City to set up a qualified opportunity business, which is a tax provision where everything they make, they won't pay any taxes on it federally. And that allows them to create significant wealth through the opportunity zones.
That's great. Harris, do you have any thoughts on this?
Sure, I'll go quickly. The university has been committed since John Fry came to Drexel 10 years ago to a comprehensive strategy for neighborhood revitalization. A lot of it is drawn from the Penn playbook that he and Judy Roden kind of created in the 90s, but it has to do with education. So building the K through 8, STEM science inquiry school, that's a Philadelphia public school that's targeted to the Mantua and local kind of catchment area. It has to do with buying local, so the goods and services and the money is spent actually within the community and the preference given to minorities. We have what's called the Dornsife Center, which is an extension program that's actually in Mantua that provides free legal clinics for tangled title. I mean, there's all kinds of services that we provide. Brandywine Realty Trust, as part of their kind of requirements for zoning, have a affordable housing fund that they've created for Mantua, Powelton, and West Powelton. There's a mentoring program for entrepreneurship and development that they are also running. Bruce Katz, who's a part of who runs the NOAC Metro Finance Lab at the Lindy Institute, is working with Della Clark on kind of small business revitalization in West Philadelphia. We're helping put together an investment prospectus for an opportunity zone at 46th and Market. And Bruce and the lab just released a report on small business, kind of a roadmap back for small business from the kind of decimation that many Black and Brown small businesses have kind of been impacted by, have felt because of the pandemic, that also has application in Philadelphia. So there's policy, there's actually programs, and there's education and outreach, all of which I think is part of what the university has committed itself to in terms of kind of this much larger social issue that's going to take a long time for us to get our all collective hands around.
Before I send this back to Ben Frank for closing remarks, one last quick question for everybody. and we'll start with Casandra and go down the row. If you had a magic wand, what would you use it for? To make the Eagles win another Super Bowl? To make the pandemic disappear?
Well, obviously the Eagles in the Super Bowl, but given that this is, I can see that, you know, within reach, I'm going to focus on, you know, I think things that I think could really grow, you know, be good for our region and grow the city. And so for me, I very much see it as, you know, lowering wage and business taxes so that we can grow jobs and broaden the tax base. Because when you broaden the tax base, you're going to have, the city's going to have more revenue to spend money on education, anti-poverty, and social programs. So that's really what I would wave my magic wand for, is find ways to grow jobs and broaden the tax base so we have more revenue for social issues.
That's good. I like that. Harris, what would you?
I would build the infrastructure for the future. What's the public transportation system? What's the park network? What are the big moves that we can make now for future generations that will enable equitable development to occur in the future? So that I would think of big systems that Philadelphia has done in fits and starts in the past. Sometimes we've led again, sometimes we've kind of caught up, but those are where I put my bet.
Like that. Anthony.
Harris took everything that I was going to say. That's exactly what I was going to say is big systems and infrastructure.
Excellent. And Ken?
I'll keep mine simple. If we're going to help Philadelphia and cities around the country, we need a blue wave on Tuesday.
I want to thank all of our panelists, Ken, Anthony, Harris, Casandra. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hand this right back over to Ben. Thank you very much. And I wish everybody continued good health.
Thank you, Natalie. Good job.
Thank you, Natalie.